Yep.
Our title screen. Okay, great. Okay, well, we'll just dive into it because I know we have a lot of folks who will be speaking today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I think we all have you on mute, but there will be occasional chiming in as people join us. And so basically, we're just here to kind of give you updates on the Shift Lab and the prototypes that we've developed. I hope most of you in attendance might have some familiarity with the Edmonton Shift Lab, but if not, basically the Shift Lab came to be after a few conversations and inquisitive minds came together in 2016 between the Edmonton Community Foundation, the Skills Society, and others. And we're actually listed as number 9 in End Poverty Edmonton's roadmap as one of the actions under the foundational game changer of eliminating racism. So, and not to paraphrase a long dead cis hetero white guy like Isaac Newton, but we stand on the shoulders of giants when it comes to being able to explore an issue like racism in Edmonton with all the previous work that's been done in the sector by so many organizations and individuals for us. And maybe before we dive into it, I will pass the microphone over to Martin Gerber-Conrad, who is the CEO of the Edmonton Community Foundation and who has been really instrumental in helping us explore this topic for the last 5 years.
Thank you, Sam. I'm pleased to bring greetings today on the release of the report, Learnings from Shift Lab 2.0. As a funder, we have appreciated the opportunity to support this unique initiative. The outcomes were not guaranteed at the onset, but we were confident the work itself would benefit the community. Now that Shift Lab has been operating for a few years, we do see significant impact and outcomes. From convening community members in the development of anti-racist prototypes, to inviting guest speakers from around the world to share their expertise, to all of us learning better how to discuss racism. A variety of Edmontonians have taken the opportunity to participate in these events and to engage with the prototypes. A particularly good example of this is the high demand for the White Fragility subscription box, now in its 2nd edition. We are excited about the launch of the 2.0 report, an opportunity for us and the wider community to learn more about Shift Lab's work and about additional prototypes being designed to further address racism in our communities. Before I close, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered, although virtually, on land that has been home for quite some time, for many Indigenous peoples and for many more, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route for centuries. We know some of these people as the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux, although they have their own names, which we will learn in time. This place where we live and gather today is acknowledged to be the territory covered by Treaty 6 and in Region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We are all treaty people, beneficiaries of the peace and prosperity the treaty brought, and committed also to working toward the equity and justice the treaty promised. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And before I begin, around the topic of racism, I kind of picked this image for a conversation starter because while the background looks pretty, initially when I see that image, I see a boat with no oars or paddles in it. And it feels like we're kind of, if you're in that boat, you're kind of stuck in the water. And I feel like for a lot of people who are perhaps only just now thinking or addressing the issue of racism, or in particular since the killing of George Floyd last year in the US, which really started a lot of these conversations, this might be a new topic for some folks, whereas for others, it's their lived experience, and it has been a part of their lives since the beginning. But thinking about being in this boat and not having any way of moving it, I imagine you're kind of, if you were to wake up in this boat, you would be stuck, and you don't know how you got there, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know how to get there. And to me, that reminds me of a term that we use, which is the sleepy middle, and that is a term that we apply to folks who we feel want to do better and want to have a meaningful impact when it comes to addressing and confronting racism, but may not know how. And this image actually gives me another metaphor, which to me is the calm before the storm, or one might think the calm after the storm. And to me, this kind of goes back to a session that we had at the beginning where we had Dr. Frances Wesley from the Waterloo Institute of Social Innovation and Resilience categorize problems. And she breaks them down into simple, complex, and complicated problems. To me personally, the issue of racism is something that I think is a chaotic problem, where problems that are highly context development and where the information about the problem is changing at any given moment. So it's hard to kind of position ourselves when it comes to addressing these things, especially when, due to social media, we see them inundating our daily lives on a regular basis. And so this image is also a good reminder that when everything is happening and these conversations are very emotional and very heated, it's also important to find some stillness and some silence for us to do this work. And I think that's something that we wanted to impress upon folks throughout the course of the Shift Lab, is that we're dealing with very heavy, weighty topics, but that doesn't mean that there isn't opportunities for levity and for bridge building and for opening our eyes and our hearts as we went down this path. So now, what is it exactly that we're exploring? Well, this is our mission statement from our first year, which is that we are a collective of people taking an action-oriented approach through a social innovation lab process to explore the intersection of racism and poverty in Edmonton. And if you want to find more about this work, you'll see that we have some links at the bottom of the screen if you go to edmontonshiftlab.ca/tools. We have some videos that you can see that are up on the top of the screen. And finally, the report, both our first year and our second year reports, are available at edmontonshiftlab.ca/report. And so now, who are we? Well, you see the 5 of us on screen. That's, in terms of people, that's myself, Ben Weinlich, Ashley Dryberg, Leah Velge, Jody Calhoun-Stonehouse. We are the stewards. We provided the overall direction and process facilitation for our work. From Shift Lab 2.0, we worked with close to 30 people from the community as part of our core team. There's too many to list, but they are all available in both the reports. And lastly, we have, let's see if this works, 5 prototype managers who you will be hearing from shortly, who will be talking about their respective prototypes. We have Anand Oliver of the Anti-Racism Box, Soni Dasmohatra of Diversity Certified, Sam Juru with Reflection Pool, Rabia Nasir of Exploring Wahkohtowin, and Paz Orlana Fitzgerald, who won't be addressing us today, but she was a project manager for both the Anti-Racism Box and the Active Bystander Resource, which we will get into a little bit later. In terms of our work, if some of you might recognize this is the Action Lab. This is a really cool space that's part of Skill Society, which was the other partner in this collaboration. And the Action Lab is, I would say, one of the coolest places in the country in terms of being a creative problem-solving space. And we did the majority of our work there with our core teams, but sometimes we were able to get out as well. In terms of who our core team was, they came to us through a general call out, as well as through different channels that we knew of people in different circles, including the activist circle, social service, nonprofit, public health, government, and academia. Each member was paid for their work. They received an honorarium, and each prototype team consisted of between 4 to 6 members. And you might notice the baby that's on Rebecca's shoulder. That's baby Arthur, who I guess is no longer a baby since it's been a few years. But the reason we've included him in this picture is to show that Oftentimes, when we wanted to have people come and contribute, you have to take into account things like transportation and childcare and feeding folks and getting the best out of them. And so as much as possible, and thanks to the support of ECF, we were able to do so. So we were able to provide transportation in forms of bus tickets and give people rides when needed. For childcare, I mean, there were times when we were happy to have Arthur as one of our core team members with his contributions, just because we knew we would get the best out of our core team members by creating as hospitable an environment as possible for them. In between our activities, we also had a speaker series, as Martin mentioned, and we wanted to bring in notable thinkers and doers who have helped us understand the issue and dimensions of racism better, both here in Canada and elsewhere. And these talks have been really productive and thought-provoking, and we have some remaining funds for that, so you might see us partner up with other groups. Most recently, we had Urshad Manji in February, and so we partnered with Public Library and a few other organizations to have her talk, and so we might do some additional partnerships with groups like Edmonton Culture and so on in the future. And so when we last had a public event, this was the launch of our prototype concepts in October of 2019 at Norquest College. And so we're here to give you an update both on the prototypes as well as the report. And so I will now hand it over to Ashley and Aaliyah to talk about our report and what's different in ShiftLab 2.0 and more about our methods and processes.
Thanks, Sam. Can you go to the next slide? All right, so Sam explained a bit of the overall container of trust that we built as we went into this lab with all the different groups. And when you think of the topic of racism, it's quite messy and complex. So this squiggly line is what it sort of felt like as we went through the lab. At the beginning, we were like, what is this problem? What are we trying to solve? And over time, as we thought deeper, we listened to those speakers in the series, we learned, we reflected, that squiggly line started to become a little bit clearer, and we got some clarity and focus. So all I'm trying to say is the lab process is messy, it's iterative, it takes a lot of time, there's a great amount of certainty. And I think applying this process to a topic like racism is hard, but we managed to get out some good prototypes. So it worked, and that's why social innovation processes make a lot of sense when you want to apply them. Next slide. So in order to kick it off and really have that rich dialogue and trust around a topic like racism, we had to start from a value-based point of view. So we started with these 4 principles around fostering a safe experimental space. We really wanted to create solutions with community, so we brought together core teams, different experts from around the world on this topic. We embraced new ways of thinking and acting. So in the lab, it was very experimental, and we brought in different ways of knowing through Indigenous processes. We had to ensure the ECF group was so trusting of a social innovation lab process. So everyone involved in this really was embracing new ways of thinking and acting so we could get some of this really hard work done. And we aim to focus on impact. So as we get further into the conversation and you hear about the prototypes, that's where the impact is really going to be made in communities, but there's also impact that's made for the people that were a part of the lab and how they reframe their thinking around a process like this. Next slide. So the journey so far, we had 2 iterations of the lab. The first one was known as ShiftLab 1.0. And in this one, we focused on the intersection of racism and poverty. It was really broad in scoping, and it was mainly built on what we call human-centered design as a methodology to bring us through that complex, messy space of unpacking hard problems. So after we went through that, we came up with 3 prototypes, and Sony is here to share one of them. But it was very broad. So we paused, we reflected, we learned in what we call a discovery phase, and then we moved into Shift Lab 2.0. And here we zoomed in on focusing strictly on racism. We wanted to target our impact on the sleepy middle, and we did that through 4 scoped challenge spaces. And to bring that all together, we came up with what we call our triple helix process approach, where we blended and weaved together Indigenous epistemologies, design, and systems thinking methods. And from that, we created the prototypes that will be presented today. So I'm going to pass it to Ashley to explain this model, and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aaliyah. Hi, everyone. If you haven't met me, my name is Ashley Dryberg, and I bring greetings from the traditional and unceded territory of the Chiana. I have recently moved back home to Vancouver Island, and it's one of the learnings that I took with me in Edmonton was this piece about we are all treaty people. And I moved back home to my original context, and there are very few treaties in British Columbia. And so I appreciate that reminder at the beginning that we are all treaty people, whether or not we exist underneath these formal Crown nation to nation relationships or not. So thank you for that introduction at the beginning, Martin. So I want to go just a little bit deeper into what Aaliyah has set us up for. And I want to begin with our triple helix model, which on top of the prototypes is one of the outputs of the Shift Lab that I am most excited about and most proud about. So as Aaliyah indicated, we started with this human-centered design methodology, which was good, but the piece of feedback that we got over and over and over again from Shift Lab 1.0 is that we weren't going deep enough. And this braiding started to emerge over the course of 1.0. And in that discovery period, the stewards really sat down and said, well, what does it look like to actually weave together these 3 methodologies that are emerging for us? The Indigenous epistemology, specifically Cree with a little bit of Sioux, some design thinking and some systems thinking. Jody's going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but the thing that I'll leave you with here thinking is that each of these orientations is about a holistic way of understanding a system. Each of them come at it from a different perspective and a different orientation. But what was able to really bring this together was this commitment to how do we see wholly together. You can go to the next slide, Sam. Okay, let's talk about the sleepy middle. You have heard this mentioned a number of times, and this is probably the biggest question we get. What the heck do you mean by the sleepy middle? As Sam indicated, imagine a continuum of people from, you know, tiki torch wielding Nazis on this end to anti-racism activists on this end. And the sleepy middle are the folks that are kind of right in the middle, as the title suggests. They are folks that might say things like, well, I don't see race, or we all have an equal chance in life, or they might laugh uncomfortably at a racist joke that a coworker tells, but they don't quite know or how to intervene, or even if they should. We are very careful not to ascribe a racial identity to these people, but we're mostly talking about white people. Let's name that. But we were very conscious not to use the language of race, of whiteness, because we know that as soon as we start talking to people that look like me and my people start to get a little bit upset. And we saw that quite clearly back in 2010 when Racism-Free Edmonton courted this massive controversy by using the language of white privilege, and the negative feedback and the response that they got was quite overwhelming, and I think is probably one of the reasons that ended up causing that project to shift. So we knew that there was some sensitivity around the language that we were using, but we really wanted to focus on white people. Martin Luther King Jr. Really brought us to this place, and he has a quote that I want to read to you that I think is as relevant today as it was when he wrote it, and this is from his letters from a Birmingham jail. So he says, "First, I must confess, over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And we see this happening today. I had a conversation with my family just last week, now that the trial for the killer of George Floyd is underway, about how those people, and I apologize for the triggering language I'm using, need to make sure that they behave properly when they're protesting. That is the exact same piece that Martin Luther King Jr. was pointing to too. And this is why we wanted to target the sleepy middle. Also, given the way that we were positioned in the lab, we felt this was a group that we could talk to and they would listen to us. But nevertheless, this was not an easy decision to come to. And we really grappled with this. And I remember, I think it was in the first sprint, and Anand and Rabia and the other core team members that are here, please feel free to chime in. But we probably spent half a day grappling with this question of why is a lab that's focused on racism focusing on white folks? Like, why are we not focusing on the folks that are suffering the consequences of this? And eventually we got there. Yeah, I don't know, Anand, Rabia, others, do you want to take a chance and jump in? Any comments on that? I'm putting you all completely on the spot.
I think I'll just say that, yeah, I think we got there. I think what we got there too is that, going to that piece around tension, I think we got to accepting that the tension is just going to be present in choosing this and making this choice. And that and how we navigate that is part of the dynamic of what we do.
Yeah, well said. Can I go to the next slide, please? So once we had our methodology and once we had our kind of focus area, our next job was to land on our focus question, which is this: how might we create better anti-racism interventions that acknowledge everyone's humanity and create behavior change? We were really inspired by Daryl Davis in the shaping of this question. And for those of you that have missed it, his talk is on our website. He is an American, he's a jazz musician, he's a Black man, and he befriends members of the Ku Klux Klan and convinces them through his relationship to leave the Klan. And when asked at this, at the talk that he gave, but how do you do it? He said something that has stuck with me to this day. And his answer was, it doesn't matter how much you disagree with somebody, with their orientation about how they think about the world, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to respect that they are a human being, which is quite challenging. And I, as a queer person, I don't know if I would be able to have that kind of grace to the rabid anti-queer folks out there. And in fact, in that audience, there were people of color who became quite agitated and upset. Like, you can't ask me to give basic human respect to someone who doesn't believe that I deserve it back. And Daryl's answer again was, yeah, I hear you. And this was the only way. So that moment really inspired the creation of this question. Given the feedback that we had also received from 1.0 that we needed to go deeper, we decided that from the top, we wanted to create 4 challenge questions for the prototypes, both to help us recruit particular people for them, but also just to make sure that we were a little bit ahead and we could dive in right to the prototypes. And so these are the 4 questions. I won't read them out. We will get into them a little bit more as we go along. And finally, last slide, if we slap this all together, we have our theory of change, which in typical Shift Lab fashion, you read from the bottom. So we start with our triple helix methodology. We focus on these 4 different questions that we have. And then we get to this pale blue piece, this capacity, motivation, and opportunity. This question around behavior change is one that we focused on, and we used a model of behavior change called the COM-B model, which was developed by Susan Michie, Lou Atkins, and Robert West. And they said in order to create behavior change, you have to have equal amounts of capacity, motivation, and opportunity. And so that lens really helped or informed how we came up with the prototypes to varying degrees. But hopefully, with all of these things together, we would get reduced racist behaviors, which would ultimately get us to better well-being. It's still a work in progress, but that's where we are. And Sam, or no, I'm sorry, Jody, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jody Callahoo Stonehouse. I'm from the Michelle First Nation. And when I was invited to participate in the Social Innovation Shift Lab, I was a little bit cautious. I thought, you know what? There's a lot of things going on in the world that seem shifty, and you've explicitly said you're the Shift Lab. But you know, to my surprise, it's been one of the most profound experiences that I've been a part of. And so now it's pushed me in my career around how can we take social innovation, you know, systems thinking, design thinking, and support Indigenous people in the work that they need to do in their communities, in their language revitalization, all kinds of work. And so some of the questions that I thought about is, can we indigenize social innovation? Well, you know, as Indigenous people, we've been adapting ever since folks have come across the big pond. We've been borrowing, adapting, modifying, sharing ideas, sharing resources, and sharing the way we live together, coexisting. So yeah, I think it's possible, and here's how. So one of the first tensions for me was the human-centered design, and folks are really, you know, proud of this idea. And yes, it's beautiful that we're putting the human at the center as opposed to a corporation. But for Indigenous people, for Nehiyaw, for the Cree people, the human is not the center. And so this was one of the tensions I had to work with around, okay, if the human's not the center, how are we making decisions when our foundation isn't the same? So for us, the center is, you know, other non-humans, the spirit beings, relationships with people. Dr. Shailene Jobin came up with this governance model, and it really shows the intricacy of relations and how they're moving, they're not fixed, they are fluid. And we negotiate when we're making decisions with all of these players. And so often in ceremony, there'll be negotiations with non-living humans, and they have just as much authority and autonomy and jurisdiction as human beings. So for me, the human-centered design was contentious, and so I wanted to talk about and look and explore, could Indigenous people modify that so that we could start to tackle some of our complex problems? I needed to look at, okay, what are the ways in which we are governed? What are the systems as an Indigenous person in the city of Edmonton? What influences my thinking, my being, my practices? And so there's ceremonial influences, there's traditional governance influences, there's the legal traditions, and then there's the Indian Act policy, which is explicit laws about what I can and can't do and where I can and can't do those things. And then there's urban governance models that influence me as an urban Indigenous people. So there was all these complex systems that weave in and out to how I interact with the world. And if we're talking about racism, I needed to see clearly what are the systems that inhibit me or other Indigenous peoples from engaging fully with society. How are these systems racist? So there was lots of work to be done and to explore, but looking at systems was one of the things that needed to be done. So when we were weaving in these epistemologies into the system work around racism, what is an Indigenous practice? What are some of the things? And so these are not prescribed. You know, part of your work when you're working with Indigenous people is to figure out, who are you working with? What is their community? What are their traditions? What are their values? What's the language they speak? Not every First Nation community has the same language, same belief system. So part of your work is listening to the stories. What are the stories that help? What is the creation story of those people? Many people have stories rooted in Christianity about how they came to be here, how they came to be alive. Other people have stories how they came from the sky people. That's how we came here, was from the stars. We're star people. And so what are the ways in which stories influence the way people make decisions? Looking at land-based practices, how do people pick medicines, harvest? What are the customary laws, the ceremonies, the languages, and how are the connections and relationships valued? And so, if we look at systems thinking, design thinking, and then indigenous thinking, they all have processes, they all have application, and they all potentially have outcomes. So our work was to imagine how might we weave these so that they have equal value, equal appreciation, and can contribute to the outcomes equally. And so this was the relationship building of bringing in the social innovation, the systems thinking. So bringing in indigenous experts into the lab, bringing the process of going onto the land, going into ceremony, starting to weave these systems and these practices together. They weren't perfect, they weren't flawless, but we all learned some things. And for me, it was an easy transition and an alignment that some of the things we already do in our communities are rooted in innovation. The way we sit in our longhouses, our big houses, in our societies, the way we consensus build, the way we come together to know how we're going to move forward to solve a complex problem are systems thinking and innovative approach. We have designs that mandate and dictate the ways in which we're going to interact with each other. And sometimes it just takes some time explicating them and pulling them apart and then figuring out how they align with Western worldview so that we're looking with two eyes seeing, so that we're seeing the complex problem with both eyes, with both worldviews. And for the Shift Lab 2.0, one of my favorite experiences was going with folks down to the river valley and harvesting the Saskatoons. Saskatoons in this territory have significant meaning. We use them in our ceremonies to give thanks. Our ancestors ate these berries, and we continue to use these berries. I mean, they're very high in antioxidants, they're medicines, they're healings. And berry picking, is rooted in the laws around women's matrilineal property rights regime. So where my grandmother took me to pick our Saskatoons is actually along the matrilineal property rights. We didn't go harvesting Saskatoons outside of our family property lines unless we negotiated with another nation or another family. So, what seems as simple as berry picking is rooted in a much deeper system of property law. And so, taking a look and engaging in some of those practices was really meaningful and significant when we were exploring what is the meaning of treaty in this territory and how did we come to where we are in this city and what might we do in the future to shift the relationship between treaty people.
Okay, thank you, Jody. I will now touch on some of the key learnings that we did with the report. So let's see. So yeah, we have a few conclusions that we got to in our report, and you'll find them there. One of the first ones that might seem somewhat obvious on the surface, but it's that we found that we made a difference with our core teams. When surveyed, the core team members and speaker series attendees all experienced an increase and a commitment to and confidence in addressing racism in their communities. They all left these sessions feeling more empowered to address racism, feeling in a better position to understand and point out situations of racism when they're happening, and also to take actions to address them. Now that might seem obvious, but I feel like that's something that we wanted to kind of understand for ourselves and to know that our process had some validity and integrity to it as we went forward. Another key learning that we have, which I find kind of interesting, is that drips are better than showers. And so what we mean by this is that up until now, the standard corporate anti-racism approach has been in the form of like a day-long diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop, for example. However, our research has shown that some of these one-and-done type of events are actually very limited or even counterproductive when it comes to fighting racism. And I think we've seen that in a number of tools that have sort of emerged. There's, for example, the implicit association test that came out a few years ago. And oftentimes these are touted as solutions and tools that can make an impact in examining or reducing racism. But I think there has, in some senses, there's been a rush to judgment in trying to find a one-stop solution. And not enough rigor has been applied to whether these tools actually have an impact. So one of the things we noticed was that drips, or nudges, as you might know them in the tech field, staggered over time, have been proven to be much more effective at changing behaviors and attitudes. And you'll see that we try to incorporate this learning in a number of our prototypes, such as the reflection pool and the anti-racism box. So we found that was better than a shower, where you spend a day or half a day in a workshop, and you're expected to become a transformed person based on a 3-hour course that's been delivered to you. Another key learning is that conventional wisdom would suggest that learning comes from being uncomfortable. And we agree, but how much is too much? At what point does being uncomfortable veer into becoming defensive, angry, or closed-minded? So a lot of this may depend on the personality and temperament of the person that's kind of experiencing this learning. So this will vary from person to person. And so the best we can say is, to some extent, this is an inexact science, but we're starting to uncover some real insights into this. And Anand will have more to say about this with the anti-racism box. So before we dive right into the prototypes, I'll just refer to this handy diagram by our developmental evaluation guru, Mark Kabaj. And it's important to notice because in any given discipline, ideas have to be tried and tested before they can be effectively deployed in the field. So this process can include discarding ideas that might be good on the surface, but for whatever reason just will not work in a given setting. So when we talk about prototypes, it's important to keep in mind that they're still very experimental and subject to revision. And sometimes they just need to actually be pulled off the shelf and worked on further. That was the case with this one, which we call the active bystander resource. So this comes from, of those guiding questions, this comes from the question, how might we design interventions that de-escalate public displays of overt racist behavior? So initially, we were thinking about, the team that worked on this came together to think long and hard about what should people do when they see an incident of racial harassment happening in public. Could be on a train station or in a park or something like that. Because increasingly, people just pull out their phones and they record it. And then we wanted to know, is there anything further that we could do about this? And so we actually created this really cool flow chart that actually provides kind of directions for how people can basically think to themselves about what they can do if they see something like an incident of racial harassment happening in front of them. The idea is that they wouldn't necessarily memorize every detail of this, but it would kind of act like muscle memory, so that would kick in when they see something like this happen. We also found that there are parallels between racial harassment and sexual harassment. So we shared this document with a couple of organizations, including the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, as well as Hollowback, an organization in the US, for their feedback. And they were quite positive about what we had put together. And then one of the things that's essential in social innovation is to test your prototypes. So we actually did this. We went out to City Center Mall, we set up a booth, we had our team out there, we canvassed people who were just walking by, trying to get their feedback on both our solution as well as insights that they have when it comes to experiencing racial harassment. In a sense, we're kind of building the airplane while we're flying it. And this was very productive, and we have a short video of this on our website. And the idea initially was that we would deploy this in schools as an anti-bullying resource. But following the spate of recent racial harassment attacks on several Black Muslim women wearing hijabs in Edmonton, we decided to pause this, and COVID also obviously had an impact. But we decided to see if we can pause this and kind of reorient this idea to have it of service to that community. And I think most recently, following City Councillor Scott McKean's motion in Council earlier this week that re-examines the public places bylaw, there's a possibility that we can take this idea and build on that momentum and roll it out in that perspective. So now I will get to the first, or to the next prototype. And so this is based, this is Reflection Pool, and I will hand it over to Sam Giroux. And this is based on the question, how might we create an interactive empathy experience that strives to reduce racist behavior over time?
Thank you, Sam. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. So my name is Sam Giroux, and by day, I work as a strategic planner with the City of Edmonton's Social Development Branch. And for the past few years, I've been playing around with social innovation through the city's social innovation team called Recover. And I've since moved on from that work, but I kind of got enamored to the potential of social innovation to solve, big social, challenges. So just over a year ago, Ben, Sam, Ashley, and some of my colleagues at the Shift Lab asked me to be the prototype manager for Reflection Pool. And I naively said yes. And I say naively because this was a pretty complicated intersecting project that involved not only anti-racism topics, but also I found as I got into the weeds that we got into technology and app development, also got into psychology. And I found myself in the weeds of behavior change, nudge theory, and all this stuff I hadn't anticipated, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of learning this past year. So essentially, as Sam said, Reflection Pool is an interactive app that inspires users to explore content related to race. And the intention of this is to build empathy, connectivity, and behavior change within staff in public organizations. So essentially my job this past year has been to pick up the original concept that was developed by the prototype team and to scale Reflection Pool app from this concept into a usable product. So because I don't have a lot of time, Sam, I think I'm gonna start by asking you to just show the Reflection Pool video, and then I can speak to it after.
Reflection Pool is an interactive app that engages your staff to explore content on various topics through a lens of compassion and self-reflection. Offering training that creates an impact on your staff and inspires change can be hard to achieve. Training can be costly, too short, too boring, or unrelatable. With Reflection Pool, we want to change that. Here's an example of how it works. Susie, a human resource lead, is looking to train her staff on intercultural education. She signs up for Reflection Pool and creates a network where her staff members can connect to on the app. Susie now selects a topic she would like her network to focus on. In this case, it is intercultural education. The app will curate a list of stories in a variety of mediums, such as articles, videos, or podcasts, for the staff to experience and engage with. The purpose of these stories is to engage, educate, and inspire staff to reflect on changing certain behaviors, thoughts, or views. We call these change journeys. After listening to the story, the staff are notified of how this change journey incorporates certain ideas, concepts, and issues. Since it can be difficult to identify possible behavior changes, staff are also given a list of possible behavior change goals they can pursue during their change journey. Lastly, staff are also given autonomy by creating their own training timeline that works for them. After they set up their change journey, staff get to respond to their first reflection question, which we call a dip. Reflection dips are based off of 4 key themes: interpersonal, intrapersonal, structural, and systemic. Interpersonal relates to social relationships, intrapersonal occurs within one's own mind, structural and systemic relate to larger systems and policies. These dips into the reflection pool provide staff the chance to reflect on their change journey in a meaningful way. Each reflection dip has with it resources and activities for deeper exploration of different topics. The staff also have access to the public reflections of everyone in their network. At the end of training, staff are asked to assess how they think they did in meeting their behavior change goals. Staff journeys are recorded on their profiles, where Susie from HR can review and understand how the intercultural education training resonated with her staff. Reflection.
No.
Thanks, Sam. So essentially, this was the idea behind Reflection Pool. So we identified that there would be about at least 3 phases in the scaling of Reflection Pool. So I'll quickly kind of walk you through the stages that we took to be where we are today. The first thing that we understood from the prototype team was that, look, this is a good concept, it's a good idea, but it's a bit flighty and non-tangible. So the first thing that we did in this work was to come up with a wireframe for the app. And really what this was it was a web-based mock-up of the app that gave you a sense of, you know, how the app would flow as you went through the pages of an application. But also, we also started to put in some of the content pieces and the behavior change nudges that you would have in a final app and what that would look like. And we're able to bring back the prototype team who have been working with us on this journey and ask them to provide us with feedback. So this was great. We got really robust feedback in terms of both the content and where to go with the content. We got, you know, feedback on behavior change theories and, you know, how to write content in a way that is, you know, palatable but inciting behavior change to the audience. And also got feedback around some of the technology piece. So we took this feedback and we identified an app developer and started to actually go through the process of developing the app and writing the content. So this has taken us many months with many challenges, but the good news is actually today, this app went live this morning. So yeah, we have, we've you know, registered the app on Android and the Play Store, and you know, all the content is in. And I understand that the app is now in beta testing mode. I'll be honest, I have no freaking clue what that means, but I think that means that it's at a point where, you know, we are able to give access to an exclusive, you know, team of people to be able to look at it. So you can see it if you go to the Play Store, but you can't actually download it. We're kind of controlling the users who will be part of the pilot phase to be able to do this. So we're going to be in this pilot phase for about 3 months. We've identified a partner, pretty large organization that's willing to take this on and test this out with their staff. And we'll be able to track the feedback, both in terms of some of the quantitative feedback and also from the back end, be able to look at the usability interface and the user interface with the app. And the idea being that based on that, we now develop the final product and the final app based on the feedback that we'll get from this organization. So I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that we had along the way, challenges of scaling, and maybe some of the solutions that we came up with in this process. The first thing that I came across was that we needed a whole lot of money. I thought developing an app cost about $5 grand. It doesn't. It costs a lot much more. So just for the mock-up piece, we realized we needed about $10,000. So I wrote a funding proposal with Sam's help to the Edmonton Community Foundation. And thank you to our friends at ECF, were able to get that 10 grand funding for us to develop the app, which was kind of proof of concept and had some really good feedback. So now we needed money to develop the pilot, which is actually the app itself. And we realized we needed about over $30,000 to do this. So once again, I went to ECF with a funding request, and they asked a lot of questions, and were really thorough around our intentions and what we're doing. And we were successful in that funding application in that. So resourcing, scaling, especially if it's within the technology space, I realized is very different from social type of community interventions in terms of just being able to need the resources to do this. The second challenge that we had, as you usually have in most social innovation, is identifying an organization that would take up this project. In this case, we were looking for an organization that would be able to incubate the piloting of this. As you can imagine, with the content that we're exploring, there was a lot of reluctance, fear from some organizations. But there was also, we realized, quite a lot of interest, especially last year, as race-based topics became pretty big and systemic racism issues were coming to the fore. So we were approached at some point by the University of Alberta, and they had a big interest and actually put in, their HR department put in a funding application to do this. Unfortunately, this was the time when there was a cut and there were cuts in funding for post-secondary institutions. So that couldn't go through, the funding was not available. And then we got lucky with the United Way, who stepped forward and said, look, we will be willing to take on and to pilot Reflection Pool app. So the United Way is actually the organization that's, the Alberta chapter, is the organization that's doing the piloting of this app, and we'll be working with them for the next few months with specific members of their staff in different departments. And that's where we'll be getting the feedback that will inform the development of the app. And one of the challenges, of course, was the COVID pandemic. My joke is that this year we've been doing social innovation without the social. So it's been an isolating experience. It's been a lonely experience, very different from the traditional, like, let's huddle and be in a group and do this, do this together. So that's been, a bit tough. And we came into some challenges with, trying to keep the prototype team together and motivated, but we're able to do this across digital space. So yes, that's Reflection Pool app, and we look forward to bigger, better things. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Sam. The Sam and Sam show, as we like to call it. And now we'll transition over to Sony Das Mohatra, and Diversity Certified. And the design brief for this challenge was, how might we create a tool that identifies racial prejudice in accessing housing? And I will turn it over to Sony.
Thank you so much, Sam. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sonia Dasapatra, and I'd like to start by really thanking Edmonton Community Foundation and the Shift Lab for their leadership and their investment in tackling the problem of racism. I would just really want to quickly start with how I got involved with Shift Lab, because I was part of 1.0, which is very different than 2.0, I think, as the stewards will read. So basically, I was born and raised in Edmonton, and I moved to Toronto, and I had moved back to Edmonton around 2016. And when I came back to Edmonton, one of the biggest shockers for me was that, oh my God, Alberta has its own brand of racism. And we joked a lot about this in Shift Lab 1, like the pickup trucks with the pieces and the ways different peoples of color and BIPOC peoples experience racism here. So it's really interesting to see how the lab came to be at this time when I was looking for a space to highlight how Edmonton needed to shift, because working in Toronto, there's a very different discourse, there's a very different understanding of how we tackle racism in different projects. So coming back to Edmonton, Shift Lab had this opportunity. Shift Lab 1.0, as Ashley has stated, was very white centering. And this is something that was disruptive to me. And one of the things that I think collectively that our cohort experienced as well was we were being so intellectual. You can't intellectualize racism. So what I really appreciated is that Jody shared is that move towards understanding storytelling, being part of ceremony. Jody's community organized for us to come to Alexis Nation, to be part of a sweat, to really understand that story. And that was really embodying the principles that have been put forward by the Shift Lab as part of this iterative process. And it's important to embody things because you can't just intellectualize them to come to a solution. So that being said, as we look at where Landlord Diversity Certificate Program was at the end of Shift Lab 1.0, Shayda, Noel, and myself actually went to many different places to try to find funding, to try to find partners. It was a long journey because really nobody wants to talk about racism and really no one wants to fund racism. Eventually, we ended up connecting with E4C, who became a really strong partner with David Pradhan, who is the Director of Mental Health. And he housed Shift Lab as prototype, this one, within the context of E4C. And him and I started sort of like negotiating and thinking about where do we get funding. Sam was there too. How do we approach funders? What do we look at? Because this is obviously needed, but we weren't able to package and sell it in a way that was, I think, sometimes responsive. So eventually the Alberta Real Estate Foundation found interest in this and they funded this. And it was really amazing to see that this particular model of getting landlords to be trained in different areas of sort of self-assessing their discrimination could lead into sort of looking at how they could change their behavior for tenants who are sort of marginalized. So that was one component. The second component was that when we did finally get the funding, Mark Kabaj and I had been talking a lot about different forms of developer evaluation. And Mark and I sort of looked at the equitable evaluation initiative that is in the States that has a really clear and different point of entry for development evaluation. And we applied an equitable evaluation initiative model to our evaluation for this particular prototype. And that is what we're working with as we're moving through this process. Now, the next phase was to actually find other partners who we could build on with expertise to really understand the triple helix and the CRE-centered pieces around epistemology. So we connected with Nahayoan and Jacqueline Cardinal to work with us. And we also connected with the Center for Race and Culture. Ellie is here. Hello, Ellie, to be able to build out this next phase of our project. COVID happened, so it was very difficult for us to engage traditionally in the form of doing focus groups and interviews as we had hoped. So now we're doing this all online as we move into this. And so far, people have been receptive. A lot of housing providers have been very receptive. They're interested. We have a big private company who's interested in working with us, I believe. And furthermore, there's also been some resistance. So for example, I just wanted to share one example before I conclude. So when I talk about this racism piece, like I had gone to a housing service supervisor in Calgary, and he's a sleepy middle. So he was very clear about like, yes, we want to do this, we want to do this. But then he went into this dialogue of me sitting there in front of him, talking about there are just some tenants who are others. There are some tenants who do these bad things. So even despite this attempt to be open and to want to have this thing, that discourse of othering, that discourse of racism, that discourse of we don't need this emerged. So this is why I think how Sam started, this is timeless. This work is timeless. It'll take a really long time to change systems, and it'll take a really long time to implement this program. But we're hoping that through the efforts of a collective of E4C and other people, we're able to push this certification program into the hands of landlords so that they can actually see their behavior change and work with their tenants to move into more equitable processes for secure housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sony. And now we'll segue to our last two prototypes, which are, I would say, a bit more further ahead in terms of their stage of development. And so the next one that we'll get to is with Anand, and he will be talking about the solution that came up to the question of how might we create encouraging pathways that help potential allies for racial justice overcome white fragility.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time and listening. And so I'm really happy to share about our prototype and where it's at and kind of the story and how we've gone. So you can see that the title here says Scrappy Prototype to Full-Scale Initiative. For those of us who are aware of You Need This Box, you will know what the journey we've gone through in the last year. A few of our team are on the call today, so I believe there's Tamreen as well as Tony from the Shift Lab team, and of course Ashley was our steward that helped us out. If you could just go to the next slide, Sam. So what is You Need This Box? For those who don't know, it is a anti-racism subscription service in which you get a box. Here's one, the first one. Here's the second one, if people can see me. There's a second one. And we're working on the third, and I'll get to that in a second. But essentially, we're a subscription service that it aims to address the sleepy middle and have them, through a series of things that they engage with in the box, move from a place of maybe complacency to awareness to action to influence and change in their world. Next slide. Nope. Yes. So it's funny. The slides got updated. So I'm like, this isn't mine. It's mine. So as Sam mentioned, our challenge question was, how might we create encouraging pathways that help potential allies for racial justice overcome white fragility? Now, this was, a lot of time for us to unpack this kind of question and figure out what we were going to do, one of the things that I want to highlight is this one piece that says overcome weight fragility. Well, weight fragility is not something that you can easily, just observe and trigger out there. It's something that happens, and it's in a moment. And so we couldn't just go out and research white fragility in the wild, so to speak. We had to think about it and what that looks like. And so we really went through quite the conversation and quite a lot of different approaches to get at what are the pathways that allow people to overcome their white fragility. And in doing that, we landed on a few things. So the next slide will help with what we landed on. So what we kind of through our research, what was highlighted is the need for there to be a relative amount of safety, and not the kind of safety that you're not challenging yourself, but where you feel like you can actually take something on, and you can process through the many kinds of emotions, feelings, and questions that may arise as someone is unpacking their own racism and their own sleepiness. Also something that is easily and accessible, so something that people can find and work with and go through. That there's a recognizable element, that the box provides something that people are kind of aware of. Subscription services are quite contemporary, and they're kind of all over the place, and so it's a recognizable kind of medium and modality, as well as making sure people are nudged to action. So it's not just about telling people you have to go do this, but guiding them through a process of change and behavior change that leads to action. And a combination that is about personal change and systemic change. So one of the things we talk about with systems and systems change is, yes, systems change is vitally important when it comes to racism. And it's us people who create those systems, who make up those systems, and hold the things in place that actually allow racism to continue to impact people all the time. So the box provides this direct journey. It's a judgment-free space. It's about experiential learning and personal calls to action. It educates without emotional labor of racialized people, and that was an important part for us. And it also creates a physical reminder of abstract concepts. People who receive the box, they keep it, and it becomes this thing that sits on their desk. It sits in front of them. It's a place where they can put resources in and take resources out. Sam referenced at the beginning this idea of discomfort. What the box attempts to do ultimately is have people confront their own discomfort in a way that they are still motivated to keep going forward, and that each box that they get is another step on that journey. So we are intending to be a 4-box subscription. We currently have completed 2 boxes, the welcome box and the second box, and are working on the third. So we're hoping by the 4th box, it will move people from a place of complacency to a place of action and making a difference in their worlds. So how has this gone? Well, when the Shift Lab wrapped up, a few of us continued to maintain the initiative, and even quite a small group, about 2 people, were kind of keeping it going. And around the time that George Floyd was murdered and the Canadian expression of the Black Lives Matter protests started to happen, and in our little WhatsApp group, I remember I sent out a little message that said, it seems like this would be a good time for an anti-racism subscription box. And the group of us came back together and we started to work on it. And also the context of this conversation almost changed overnight in North America. I would say almost globally to a certain extent when it comes to the mainstream. We were debating whether we should put, white fragility, white privilege, even mention racism on our website when we were initially thinking about launching this. And then the world changed, and we were like, you know what, we're going to just call it like it is, and go with what the language is there for us to harness and talk about what our initiative is. So it took us about 2 weeks to move from we have what we have to actually getting ready to launch. And somebody who you all may be familiar with, Ben Weinlich, got a hold of the fact that our social media Instagram account went live one night. he tweeted out and Instagrammed out to his followers that this cool initiative from Shift Lab 2.0 is about to launch. And so we went from expecting about 30 and being prepared for about 30 boxes to be subscribed to 1,000 boxes being subscribers within 48 hours from across Canada. So we went from like tiny to quite large in a small amount of time. We've continued to kind of manage that, kind of ride that wave and try to keep on top of it with the generous support of the Edmonton Community Foundation, which is a key theme here. A really key and supportive funder becomes a big part of the change here, as well as the Stollery Charitable Foundation have helped us to continue to move forward. You know, as you can see, the slide says 2,300 boxes. I think more than that now. We're working on we shipped out box 2 to 1,000 subscribers. We're working on box 3. It's an across Canada audience. Obviously, the majority is from the Edmonton area and Alberta. However, we go from coast to coast to coast, and it's been quite the journey so far. You know, as far as what the impact it's making, this is, you know, it's early days, and what I'll say is that we're learning all the time the difference that it's making for people, and what they're saying, what they're saying about how they're applying the box. You know, we still consider ourselves to be a prototype, but we're just a prototype at a certain scale. There was a graphic earlier that Mark Cabage put together about, you know, these different iterations that lead to pilots. Well, we're operating at a certain scale, and we still consider ourselves a prototype that's learning and growing. This is some feedback that we received from our welcome box so far and what people are doing with it. It's really, you know, people want to raise anti-racist children. They want to be able to get a foundation of understanding so they can raise their children in a way that is meaningful when it comes to anti-racism. They want to have more effective conversations. They want to actually practice and be anti-racist professionals. It's important for them to see a Canadian perspective. So that's one thing that's important with our box, is that all the content is grounded in the Canadian experience of racism, both the long history of racism in Canada, as well as the contemporary dynamics of racism in Canada. Also, it's allowing people to seek out and look at new perspectives and be able to share with the people around them. One thing that has been quite profound, and when it comes to the different kinds of opportunities that these types of initiatives result in, we are being approached by a number of different sectors or systems, so healthcare system, education system, asking us if we can get involved in helping them and their sectors and systems use maybe the approach of the box or the approach that we take to address racism in those systems as well. I think the next slide. Yeah, so that's about it for me. So you know, I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you, and feel free to go to, what is it? youneedthisbox.ca if you want to learn more.
Thank you so much, Anand. Yeah, the box has simply been a complete success story from a social innovation lab perspective. And then the other big project that is coming out now is exploring Wahkohtowin. And so I will refer to Rabia. And the question around this one was, how might we reimagine what it means to be a treaty person? And I'll hand it over to Rabia.
Thank you, Sam. And James Lamouche will be presenting with me. So just to start off with, I'd like to acknowledge the Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of Indigenous people who have lived and passed through here for many centuries and continue to enrich our shared communities, to remind the truths of our settler presence and affirm our commitment to honor the spirit of friendship in which the original treaties were signed. So Wahkohtowin is a Cree word, and the meaning of that word is kinship interwoven in relationships, communities, and natural systems. From an Indigenous perspective, Wahkohtowin establishes a roadmap for guiding human actions and connections. So the Exploring Wahkohtowin board game, we're really aspiring to spark non-Indigenous people to start thinking about the meaning and impact of treaty and how can we better our relations. So the first step we're looking at is really rebuilding the relationships. And in order to do so, knowing the shared history of the territories and the impact of events, policy, and legislation on us all is of vital importance. So the purpose of the game is to be an entry point to foster dialogue in an engaging and meaningful way.
Sorry, Tansen Tutemnik. My name's James Niblamouche. I work with the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center, and I'm helping Rabia with developing the board game. And she asked if I could help out with some of the providing comments to the presentation. Hi.
Thanks, James. So in November 2019, we started to have a conversation with various Indigenous elders, organization, and community members. And we formed a team consisting of a board game developer, our graphic designer, content creation from James' side and his research team, and educators. And so our first phase was really brainstorming and thinking about some really important questions. So which you see on this slide, we started thinking about what's the big idea we want players to come away with? What is the story we're telling with? What are some important and supporting ideas? And what emotions do we want to evoke in players? So this is a really an important dynamic, right? You want people to come up, leaving the game with an emotion of where they can make change, but at the same time coming to a point of empathy. So we really had to navigate around that. And then the logistics of the game. So really thinking about the play time, how many players, the reading level, how are we going to incorporate the game in these various dynamics, in an educational setting, what would be the mechanics in looking at building the game?
And just for a point of reference, when we first started out, the question was more framed around making a game around Treaty 6 or treaty in general. And as the team came together and started to talk about some of the issues and the context and the history that you would need in order to play that game effectively, we decided to take a step back and look at relationships more generally. And that's what we ended up focusing on for the development of the game, instead of the sheer level and complexity that we saw in trying to make a game of the treaty process.
And so exploring Wahkohtowin then is a cooperative board game for 2 to 4 players, age 14 and up, and it's played in rounds moving through 4 seasons of the year. So this is not a close-up, but you can see that there's 4 seasons, and each player represents an Indigenous family, so they possess knowledge, skills, and resources for survival. So as the players move through the rounds, the event cards guide them through major events in history of our shared territories. So through various locations on the game board, players have the opportunity to gain knowledge, tools, and resources as a way to sustain their family. And players will also experience the impacts and restrictions imposed by their actions and events, so such as the Homesteader Act and the creation of reserves. Players will move through the simulation of experiences associated with resource scarcity, illnesses, treaties, and various policy and legislative actions. So in the end, the player that has moved through all the events and the player with the most Indigenous knowledge cards would be the victor in reclaiming and rebuilding their future.
Thanks, Rabia. And one of the goals, or one of the overarching goals of the process, was we wanted to give the players an accurate depiction of the history, but we also wanted to give people agency and to make it as fun and uplifting as possible. So if we did truly present an accurate depiction of history, it would be very depressing for the players. But we wanted to show them that even though some of the background is kind of dark, but there were actions that nations took, that individual families took, that individuals took to try to make their own lives, their own communities, and their own families better, or have a better prospect for the future. So that was something that we were always keeping in mind while trying to respect the fact that there are some dark and horrible policy and legislative things that have happened in the past.
So can you move to the next slide, Sam? Thank you. So the board game is intended as a learning tool in kind of facilitating the discussion and sharing knowledge. So you'll see in the previous slide, we talked about a Wahkohtowin background document. So this is provided to educators and game hosts to assist them in providing context, historical information, and further resources for information and discussion. So the game rules also include a game guide, so that would provide more context for the specific aspects of the gameplay. So we're really looking at also providing that supplementary resource that will help build and bridge that learning for the game players. And so now in this last slide here, you see where are we now? What is the current state? You can see that the game prototype has changed from the previous slide that we've shared with you. So through 4 or 5 rounds of testing and looking to do one more final round with the educators, we're incorporating feedback from the Indigenous gaming community. So we've connected with Wahkohtowin Games and also with the University of Waterloo Game Institute and individual game designer connections. So they are helping us in terms of incorporating various feedback in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the design, content, and we've been integrating that as we've been going through the journey. And we're also looking at connecting with Wahkohtowin Games for our launching and retailing as we move forward. So the visual design is being refined to build empathy and feeling through the textured imagery of the nature and the surroundings. So you can see in this current state, we've really tried to emphasize that we want to get people to connect with the land, with the environment. So you'll see a real focus on the way that everything is designed in there and the imagery as well. So our current designer, Ryan Janvier, is doing an amazing job on the design aspect. So once we have the content design and testing completed, we'd like to produce one final board game and then move to the next phase of mass production and marketing. As well, we'd like to explore creating a digital platform apps as well. And so Exploring Wahkohtowin has been featured in the Edmonton Journal, Edify, and the Well Endowed podcast.
Thanks. One of the main things that we wanted, or we're envisioning, is that this would be a facilitated gameplay. So there would be an educator or a leader, so to speak, that would help with setting up the game, following the rules. Each point, or in different points during the game, there's historical context that needs to be provided or information that needs to be provided. So the game guide tries to give short versions of that information. There's also a background document that we'd hope that the facilitator or educator would be able to read prior to gameplay. And that was a way for us to have it so that people could pick it up and reasonably play the game without any of the supporting documents. But to get the full experience or the best experience from it, you would need somebody to do a bit of homework in order to do that. So some of the work that, or some of the suggestions that come through the various versions of the test runs, with Wahkohtowin especially, is that they've also given us some good ideas on how to make this more of a multiplayer game. So right now, the way that we've done it is a facilitated game. You play through it once and it kind of follows that same script or that same order. Whereas to get games where people come back to play over and over, you need like more choose your own adventure type of thing. So later on, we might consider doing a game version that allows for multiple plays instead of a guided and directed educational play session. To give you some examples from the game guide, some of the context that comes up is that the treaties weren't standalone treaties. They were in context. There were numerous treaties made beforehand. There were treaties between nations, Indigenous nations. There were different treaties between European nations, not just the British Crown, but also other European nations as well as the Americans. Right, the entire context of the Industrial Revolution, the various wars going on in Europe, all those things we tried to at least cover some of that content in the background document and the game guide to give people more of a flavor of why treaties were entered into on the First Nations perspective. So one of the things that kind of gets mythologized or misunderstood in a historical context was that Indigenous peoples are very strongly associated with treaties, but a lot of people didn't enter into them freely. So it was a context because of the extirpation of bison on the prairies that forced choices on Indigenous people. So a lot of those decisions were the best choice of a lot of bad options kind of thing. And that was something that we tried to bring forward in this, again, without being too much of a downer on the gameplay side of things. But I think we managed to actually incorporate a genocidal act into the game without doing too much damage to the psychology of the players.
Thanks for that insight. And just one final note. Sorry, Sam, I know with the time. I just want to take just 1 second to recognize and appreciate our contributors. So the Shift Lab stewards, for your amazing support in this journey. Shift Lab 2.0 team. I know I have a few members here. They were the initial, brainstorming of this idea and have been pivotal in terms of providing advice and their wisdom. Roberta Taylor, our game developer, James Lamouche, and the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center research team. You've been our backbone. You've been amazing throughout the whole journey. Tasha Power and Ryan Janvier, our graphic designers. Ron Lehman from the Treaty 6 Confederacy. His wisdom and guidance has been important to continue this journey in the right way. Elliot Young and Sarah Cardinal from Norquest, the Edmonton Community Foundation, and also the Yellowhead Indigenous Education Foundation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Rabia. So yeah, that kind of brings us to the formal end of our showcase of all the prototypes and the report. We've got the stewards and the prototype managers, all their names and the emails are there if you want to reach out and touch them or contact them. It's important to note that a lot of these prototypes are still in development, and that includes we're still seeking funding for a lot of them. So if anyone out there in this presentation or who sees this presentation when it gets recorded and sent out has opportunities to share for funding with us for any of these prototypes, we'd be super grateful to continue this work. Edmonton Community Foundation has been very generous in getting us to this point, and as have other organizations. And now we're hoping to just get some additional funding to really bring these things across the finish line and have them out there for everyone. And in the meantime, if you'd like to open it up for questions for anyone.
I would just like to say, Amarjeet Sohi, I really hope you run for mayor.
Sorry, Jody, I didn't expect that question. Thank you, though. Thank you.
You have our support.
Thank you. What I'll say, Sam, thank you for inviting me. I've been teaching compassionate, collaborative, and anti-racism capacity building course at McCune University. We did one session, and we have one more planned starting early next month. This presentation really resonated with me because it touches on many of the topics and aspects of how to build that anti-racism capacity, particularly how people become defensive and how do you actually, what steps we need to take to bring them along to talk about this very important and difficult, sometimes, most time uncomfortable conversation. So, reflections, just slowing down our thinking process and stepping back and, talking about our biases and assumptions and how we learn those things from the society, from the culture, and how they become part of the whole system. This is pretty, I would say, very important work that you have undertaken here. So congratulations to all of you. I look forward to any possible of collaboration in any way I can support it.
Thank you, Amarjeet. And I think one of the things we want to put across is, you're right, is as James said with the game, we're talking about a lot of very negative, heavy subjects, but we're hoping that with these prototypes here's another way of having these conversations and starting down these journeys with physical, tangible things that don't necessarily have to have that negativity around them, but can instead offer alternative ways to to start these anti-racism journeys. So I think we have got a couple more minutes. If there's anyone else who'd like to, we're getting a lot of positive feedback in the chat, but if anyone else had any questions, we're happy to take those.
It's Shalini here. I don't have a question to say, but I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed the creativity and the energy that is clearly there through all the work that's being done here in the Shift Lab. I really enjoyed how, you know, again, visual and creative and fun all the prototypes are and all the messaging is. And, you know, similar to Amarjeet there, as someone who's been working in the anti-racism space for decades, I have often found myself a lone voice out there in terms of talking about creating safety and support and nurture in order to, you know, help humans make these shifts. And I really enjoyed watching the humor and the thoughtfulness and the insight come through all these projects. So I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini, or should I say Madam Chair of the city's Anti-Racism Advisory Council. It's great to hear that feedback. There's a question about Shift Lab 3.0 on the way. Well, we're not sure yet because the initial collaboration with Skill Society is over. And so we have to actually pay to use the Action Lab. It's not free for us anymore. And the commitment from ECF has sort of reached its conclusion. And so at this point, we're mostly concentrating on getting these prototypes out into the marketplace or into schools, into the public. And then at that point, I think we might kind of reassess as to what to do next, because I think we've kind of tapped into kind of a springboard for new ideas for addressing racism. And so I'm hoping that this momentum will continue. But right now, our main job is to just get these prototypes out into the world as products.
I just want to pop on again and just say a huge thank you. This started with a dream on a napkin and a sunny afternoon where we were trying to convince Jody that we weren't actually going to murder her. She looked that skeptical, and there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of people that have been involved with this from the very beginning. And Kate and Ward, I see you on the call. You were with us at our very, very first launch. Martin, you have been supporting us from the very beginning, and everyone else who has been here who has been cheering us on or giving us feedback or telling us when we're messing up or just helping lift up all of the amazing creativity and voices and humor here. Like, there are no words to describe the depth of my gratitude for all of you. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for creating this space to happen. It really, truly does take a community to raise these prototypes and interventions into the world. So thank you.
Great. Well, that brings us to just after 2:30. And so I think we will formally close this part of the presentation. If you have any questions for any of us or for the lab in general, you can reach us at edmontonshiftlab@gmail.com. For all the individuals that have spoken today, their emails are there as well. So thank you all very much for your time. And as Ashley said, we started 5 years ago on a sunny afternoon. And so it's wonderful that we're concluding on a sunny afternoon here in Edmonton. And we're happy to keep these conversations going forward. And please keep an eye out for these prototypes in the future.
Much love. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe.